Yeah. Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. It is the 23rd of February 2021. I'm your host, Byron Pace. This conversation I recorded at the end of last year, so November, December 2020. I don't think there's anything that's particularly dated, but I just wanted to let you know so that you're aware as you're listening to this chat with Adeline Fox, who is the board president of the Big Bend Conservation Alliance, which is an organization based in Texas. It is, in some regards, quite a Texas-centric conversation. However, so many of the aspects, if not all of the aspects that we talk today, are actually applicable globally. So we talk about water provision and conservation, the disturbance of putting in natural gas pipelines, dark sky reserves, work around preserving cultural heritage and why that's important. All of these things are not just a Texas issue. So I think that wherever you're listening to this podcast from, you'll be able to draw parallels from our conversation today. But before we get into it, I need to announce the winner from the competition that we've run over the last 2 weeks, which was to win a copy of Modern Huntsman Volume 3. And all I asked you to do was sign up to the newsletter on modernhuntsman.com. And we randomly selected somebody who's done that in the last 2 weeks. And that person is Jefferson Downing. So well done, Jefferson. You are the winner. Reach out to me, podcast at paceproductionsuk.com, or on any of the social medias. I'm Byron J. Pace pretty much everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And we will get a copy of Volume 3 out to you. Of course, we are going to run another competition, which will go for the next 2 weeks, again, to win a copy of Modern Huntsman, who are our partners on the podcast. A lot of exciting things happening this year. We are right in the discussions of the bones of what is going to be Volume 7. But unfortunately, I cannot give you any information on that right now, other than to tell you it's going to be awesome. Again, I'm going to keep it very simple. Just share this podcast somewhere on some social media platform. You can get all of the tags and find all the places to do that by just heading over to my website, which is byronpace.com. And you can check out all the tags if you can't remember them or you struggle to find them. But if you search my name, you'll be able to find me on social. So when this podcast goes out, as you're listening to it, share it on social, make sure you tag me, and I will pick a winner at random in 2 weeks' time, and we will send a copy of Modern Huntsman out to you. And lastly, before we dive into the show, I have to do a shout out to our top tier Patreon supporters this month, who include Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, James Marchington, the guys at South Esher Stalking, Josh Starling, Thomas Cameron, Mark Zabrowski, and the team at Galax Clothing. We've had a couple of new Patreon supporters in the last few weeks who are not necessarily top tier, but every dollar, every pound, every euro, whatever denomination you support the podcast in really helps. So you can head over to patreon.com/Byron Pace, and you can have a look at the tiers there and see how to support the show. You can also just go over to byronpace.com, click podcast, and there's a way to donate to the podcast. If you don't want to sign up to a Patreon account and don't want to do something that's monthly, you can just make a one-off donation. Everything really helps towards getting these podcasts out every week and creating the opportunity for me to speak to these fascinating people who not only teach me a mountain of information and things I didn't know, but hopefully teach you as well. So with all of that said, I will delay you no further. Please welcome Adeline Fox to the show. Adeline, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. Fantastic to have you on today, all the way from what part of North America are you in right now?
I'm actually in Austin, Texas.
Okay, so you are in the great state of Texas. I was there at the start of the year for the first time.
Oh,
cool
amazing.
Place.
Did you like it?
I loved it. I bought a pair of cowboy boots.
That's a given. I mean, you have to do that.
You cannot go to Texas, and certainly can't go to Dallas, Texas, and not come away with a pair of cowboy boots. I stopped short at the hat. I don't have a cowboy hat.
Yeah, that's your second trip.
Yeah, I had to leave something to come back for. Not that I need an excuse. I really enjoyed my time. In fact, I was there twice. I did a job in somewhere outside of Houston in December, and then I was back again in February.
That's awesome. Yeah,
twice, having never been before.
That is really great. We'd love to have you back anytime. So feel free to visit again.
Are you a Texas native?
I am. I was not born in Texas, but I was here as soon as I turned 1. So technically, I consider myself Texan. I wouldn't know any different.
So you rock the cowboy boots and cowboy hat?
I do. Yeah, I actually have them. I don't wear them as much in Austin, but I definitely wore them a lot in my heyday.
Awesome. So, just we're going to talk a lot today about the Big Bend Conservation Alliance, which was brilliantly brought to my attention, and I'm so glad. I'm so glad that it was, and what that entails, how it was set up, what your involvement is there. But since I do not really know you at all, give me a little bit of background. So before your position at the Big Bend Conservation Alliance, what has been your background? What have you been involved in?
So I actually grew up on my grandmother's ranch. She was a rancher in far west Texas and had Hereford cattle and horses. And I grew up riding horses, and it was just like every other day. I didn't even realize that was unique at the time. And then when I started school age, I moved to this small town called Valentine, Texas, which has 200 people. There were literally two kids in my class, me and one other person. So it was quite crazy, coming to Austin and starting from such humble beginnings, but very rural upbringing. And then I graduated from high school and went on to study agricultural communications. And I interned in Washington, D.C., thought I was going to be in the policy realm. And then I changed my mind and decided that the nonprofit world was much more my space. And so now I live and work in Austin and work as a director of communications for 2 nonprofits that relate to water policy. They do a lot of water policy work for statewide interests.
Okay. And one of those is the Big Bend Conservation Alliance.
That's actually a separate thing. So,
so this is a whole other thing. Okay.
Yeah,
so tell me about the 2 nonprofits that you work for.
So one of them is called the Texas Groundwater Association, and they're a trade association for groundwater professionals. So a slew of different people from anything relating to groundwater, including geologists, hydrologists, water well drillers. It's quite a different group there. And then Texas Water Conservation Association, which is focused on water supply and just making sure that Texas has enough water to sustain through the many years and the population growth that we're seeing here. And then Big Bend Conservation Alliance is my volunteer time. I am president of that organization, and we are based in Alpine, which is where I grew up. So that's my connection to BBCA.
Okay, so I will say BBCA from now on. I'm amazed that you have time to do anything else after everything else that you've listed. I have to ask, before we go and talk about BBCA, obviously water is vitally important. We all need water to survive. I think most people are increasingly aware of what could be, in certain states or in certain countries around the world, there is a legitimate water crisis, and it's upon them or impending. Some people say that the great wars that are going to be fought in the future are going to be over water and not gold and oil. But what is it about water that has clearly drawn you in, and that has been one of the things that you're really focusing on here?
Yeah, so I assumed I was going to be working in ag policy.
Yeah, this is what I figured. Yeah.
The route had
which is kind of
me...
connected. I mean,
Yes.
For agriculture, you need water.
Absolutely. And so my first job out of college was actually working with a groundwater conservation district. And I started looking at data that I had never seen before that was showing, these major depletions in wells that should have a steady supply. And there was somehow, we were using more than we were putting back in. And it just really hit me that, wow, this is a career path for me. This has to be talked about. We have to communicate these issues and really find solutions for them. And so that's why the communications and water piece really made sense for me.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't consider we extract groundwater. Well, we don't do it so much here where I live in Scotland. We take a lot of water from rivers and burns and stuff. We have a lot of water that flows on the surface. But around the world, we extract a lot of groundwater. But some of these aquifers that are supplying this groundwater took tens of thousands of years to fill up, and they're not filling up as quick as we're extracting. And this concept that there are these underground lakes, I think a lot of people think of them like we think of the lakes on the surface, which is... Right. Well, you can't possibly I mean, if you took out more than you put in, we'd see the river dry up that's flowing out the other side. It's something that doesn't really happen, or certainly doesn't really
Yes.
happen in the part of the world that I live in. I mean, we see in warm summers, we see the levels of these, some of these lakes goes down, but the rivers pretty much always flow. But it's a completely, I mean, the geology involved is completely different when you're talking about underground aquifers.
Yes. And in Texas, I think we are dependent on 50% of our total state resources are from groundwater. And so it's a
Wow.
huge number. That's why managing it and making sure that it's, going to be lasting for future generations is so important, because we rely on it. And we don't have, the water that we have is the same water that we've always had. It's not like we can create more. It's just
No,
a
no,
matter
it's just
of,
a cycle.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's the management piece of it. It's, we have, I don't know, 1,100 people, I think, moving to Texas every day, which is great. But also, where are we going to find water for all of these people? And how do we make sure that we're taking care of our rivers and so that they're clean and still fun to play in?
Yeah. So,
So,
what are you doing about the groundwater sourcing to make sure that extraction, because almost any extraction is at that kind of scale, when you're extracting for cities of the scale that exists in Texas, is going to be beyond what they can replenish at.
right. So, a lot of it is really about just being more technological, being more efficient with how we're using water. And a lot of the United States has already kind of moved everything indoors to proper conservation. And so it comes down to a usage thing where there's an education piece to the public to say, listen, did you know that you're wasting gallons if you leave the water on while you're brushing your teeth? And so the
It's awesome that you bring that up because sorry to
do
interrupt you,
you
but
do this?
that
Yeah.
no, well, this is exactly what was going through my mind because the one thing about wasting water that I ever remember from school here, bearing in mind I live in a country that rains all the frickin' time, so water is not really a problem here. Somewhere like down south, it is. They have water shortages sometimes every year to an extent, and they have hose pipe bans and that kind of thing. That doesn't really happen up here. But the one thing I do remember being taught at school, at primary school, is, hey, when you're brushing your teeth, do you leave the tap running? It's like, oh yeah, that is really a waste of water. Why am I doing that? So turn the tap off if you're brushing your
Mm-hmm.
teeth, and then when you need to rinse and spit, turn the tap back on. It's simple,
Exactly.
but it's multiply that by 380 million people, or however many people are in the USA,
Yes.
65 million people, and then around the world, it adds up.
It's crazy. And in Texas, well, in Austin, I should say, we have a conservation strategy, and I say we because they're a member of the organization I work with. But they have a strategy that says conservation is our cheapest and also most effective way to reduce water usage and to have future supply. So conservation is a huge strategy, and that's really an education piece that will be impacting the public, because the public is very comfortable with just having water come out of the faucet, no need to worry about it. But yeah, there's always a source. And so educating people about the source is important.
So you're actually trying to encourage people to think about the conservation of these environments that your water actually comes from. So these
Right.
kind of these headwaters and basins that are water
Yes.
catchments was the word I was looking for, that are
Yeah. And
feeding the water to your tap.
right. Because it's been proven that if people can understand the source, they're more willing to save. That actually was
I
a
see.
report done back in the early 90s that Texas did at a state level. And in Central Texas, which is where I am, the aquifers, you can actually go into these cavernous formations and see the aquifers a little bit
That's
better.
incredible.
It is incredible. Yeah, you can actually walk into the Edwards Aquifer, which is really incredible, but it also helps people visualize, oh my gosh, this is a living, breathing thing. I can understand the recharge. I can understand rain filling this. I can understand using it. In other parts of Texas, it's not that simple, and you can't really see the groundwater or the formation beneath the surface. So
Yeah.
just a little fun fact.
That's so very true, and it's the same with, when we're looking at species protection, which is a whole
Mm-hmm.
other thing, is like actually the definition of species. But one of the arguments for being very definitive about what a species is how can you expect people to care and protect something if they don't know what it is?
Right.
So to be able to give something a name, a scientific name or a name in common usage as the animal that you're trying to protect
Mm-hmm.
is far more effective than it's far more effective than just saying, and this is something that is discussed all the time right now, especially with the release of David Attenborough's film like a week or 2 weeks ago, is we
Yes.
need to protect biodiversity. But then the big question is for a lot of people, and I study this, and it's not an easy answer. Is like, well, what the hell is biodiversity in the first place? Well, actually, even the scientists can't really tell you what that is. We have broad concepts of it, but when you
Mm-hmm.
really start to break that down, you're trying to work out, well, what are we then protecting? Because you can't just say, well, let's protect everything, because again, like, what does
Right.
that mean? And we can't protect everything. We need to work out where our limited resources are best used. So being
Mm-hmm.
able to provide a visual stimulus for people to take action upon, it's so very important. So with this work that you're doing, it is then getting people to change the way that they live their daily lives. So the toothbrush example is just one of many, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's part of it. Obviously, outdoor usage is probably still the largest usage for residential people watering their lawns and things like that.
Ah,
So, retrofitting sprinkler systems, and these are things that I'm not working on, but the industry in itself, these are things that the industry is pushing for residential people to do. Just to have, you know, native plants in your yard. It's as simple as that. It's crazy that people will have, hyacinths in the desert, and
it's
that doesn't
insane.
belong there.
It's absolutely insane. And I've seen this because I spend a bit of time in LA and in California and around there. And they're pretty good actually in many places that you'll see a lot of like desert adapted plants or
Hmm.
plants that belong in the desert. And you don't see a lot of lawns because it doesn't rain there very much and because you can't water them. But then every now and then you see like this pristine like mat of grass, which is actually grass. And you're thinking to yourself, why?
Hmm.
Why are you doing this? And even if I extrapolate that to like this country, we have so much grass here that is cut like within an inch of its life every week. And I've been guilty of that too. Now, next year, what I want to do is I've established a whole heap of other lawn, and there's good reasons why people want lawns in their garden because it's
Sure.
easy to maintain. It's good for the dog to go and have a wee on, and the kids to play on. But what I'm going to do next year is I'm actually going to try, and I sowed a lot of field grass in there. So I'm going to try and just do 2 cuts for the year. Let it grow long, let it seed, let it flower, and it's going to be so much better for the wildlife. And the same is true with exactly what you're saying, which is plant things that are sympathetic and actually
Hmm.
belong to the environment that you live in. And especially in a place like Texas or California where water is such at a premium, I'm amazed actually that there isn't legislation in place that prohibits people from planting inappropriate foliage that is a water draw.
To my knowledge, in Texas, it's a city by city kind of case. So Austin probably has more progressive rules on the books for what you can plant and what you can't, while other areas are a little bit more lenient, but it's all based on city ordinances. So there's nothing at the state level.
Okay. So, as a matter of interest, what other initiatives are there, and what other are the other big draws? I imagine industry, various forms of industry, do they outstrip the many individuals who are using water?
Definitely. Yes. So
Yeah,
industry, municipalities, and agriculture are kind of our top
of
three.
course, agriculture will be a
Yes,
huge
top
one.
three.
Yeah.
And we have a huge agricultural sector that's very important to our economy and very important to our food and fiber sources here. But yes, I think over time you'll see that irrigation number getting lower as we have more people moving to the urban centers in Texas. And that's something that we're planning for. As a state, we have a state water plan where we're tracking all of these trends and the supply and the demand and trying to make sure that we're on track to meet our goals. And that's just as a state of Texas. That's not the organization I work with. We're just affiliated on the fringe. But yeah, industry is an interesting one because oil and gas is also a huge economic driver for the state of Texas. I think a third or maybe even two-thirds of our budget that the legislature has is from oil and gas revenue. And of course, it employs a lot of people. So an important industry. They have gotten better at recycling water for fracking. Initially, they were all using fresh water to frack oil
Yeah.
wells, and that was obviously very wasteful. But now you see the industry kind of shifting gears a little bit. They're understanding that it's not economically impossible to recycle this water and still get the product they need. So I think there's more to do in terms of oil and gas industry, but they are looking at these technologies.
Okay. Yeah, no, the whole water discussion is a fascinating one and so very, very important.
Yes, thank you for letting me really geek out on that for a little
Oh,
while.
absolutely. No, I'm all for geeking out on water uses and water conservation because it's, I mean, there's so many places that you can go with that. One of the big campaigns right now is happening here in the UK is actually just trying to improve the water quality of a lot of our rivers, and we have done like an amazing job in many rivers over the last, say, 50 years. I mean, there was a time where the Thames was basically toxic, and now fish actually run the Thames again.
Wow.
And there's many rivers which have recovered, but equally there's many instances of little streams running into bigger rivers which still have like raw sewage flowing into them because of poorly maintained sewage systems in rural communities, and sometimes poorly maintained sewage systems actually in the cities themselves. So there's a lot of work to do. And I think that, as is probably true in many countries around the world, those sort of government departments tend to be under-resourced.
Yes.
And the other big thing, actually, and I guess this is probably true where you are as well, but it's definitely true here because our towns and cities are much older than yours, is that our water pipe network, some of it is so freaking old that it's cracked and leaking and just like pissing water everywhere underground, which is
Yes.
so incredibly wasteful. And in the cities, it's actually one of the biggest uses of water is not using it appropriately because of cracked pipes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Aging infrastructure is a number one priority at the federal level where, aging infrastructure in water is dire because if you have lead pipes, then there's contamination.
Oh
The whole
God,
Flint,
yeah.
Michigan debacle was horrendous. And so I think
Oof,
we
that's
need
a
we
whole
need more
story,
funding.
that.
Yeah, let's not even go there actually.
Well, I tell you what,
Uh,
just for people interested, before you carry on, there's a series of documentaries about Flint
mm,
on Netflix. There's one called Flint Town, which is mainly, it started off about water, but then it was about the police force, and then I think Michael Moore did a whole documentary on Flint, didn't he?
I think
About the water
so. That
crisis.
sounds
Yeah,
familiar to me. Yeah.
yeah. God, yeah.
So
Let's
it's
not
a
go there.
problem here too. Yeah, aging infrastructure is a top priority that we really need to address in terms of funding. So
Yeah. So okay, let's go from water to BBCA.
okay.
When did you get involved with? Well, tell me about when you got involved with how you found out about them before we start talking about actually what they are. Apart from
Sure.
having an acronym that trips off the tongue.
Well, I moved to Austin in 2016, and I was actually at a work event, and I ran into one of the founding board members, Matt Lara, who is no longer on the board. But I ran into him, and he was living in Austin on the board, and he said, "We're looking for board members for Big Bend Conservation Alliance." And I don't think he knew I was from Alpine originally. And so I just said, "Oh my gosh, this would be amazing. I would love to get involved somehow." And so I've been on the board since 2016. Pretty much after that conversation, it was really amazing how quickly that progressed. And then I became president in January of 2020. So still in my first year of presidency.
Oh, amazing! So, what is it? What is the Big Bend Conservation Alliance?
Yeah, great question. So we were founded in 2015 in response to a 143-mile pipeline tearing through private land. So it was a natural gas pipeline that was en route from far west Texas through Mexico all the way to the Mexican coast, which would have been exported. And so there's been a demand for natural gas overseas. This was a terrible pipeline for us because it was tearing up the lands that we love. And so the founding members of BBCA created this grassroots movement where they were bringing in landowners and community members of all different backgrounds to say, look, we understand this is a resource that's important, but why here? Why does it have to tear up this part of Texas? And so they actually had the highest number of on-the-docket comments about natural gas pipeline in the history of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And that is the organization that regulates transmission and sale of electricity and natural gas in the United States. So they had an incredible effort. Unfortunately, the pipeline was still put in the ground, but that is how we started. And that grassroots, really fire and passionate group of people has progressed into what we are now, which is an organization that focuses on water, land, dark skies, and cultural resource. So we've kind of expanded
so much
our
cool
mission.
Stuff.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Yes,
well, I want to get into all these facets of what BBCA is now, but
Absolutely.
Just because I'm intrigued. So, I mean, the pipeline. You assume. If we assume that we're going to carry on using fossil fuels, which right now we are, the pipeline had to go somewhere. So was there a better place to put it? And why did it eventually still go where it was where they had originally planned to put it, despite all the opposition that clearly came up from it?
Well, it was a little tricky because in Texas, private pipeline companies can issue eminent domain, which is taking of private lands for public good. But the thing is that it was not really a public good for the people where the pipeline route was. It's a public good for whoever's getting the product at the end of the line. And so it's, I would say, as strong as our voices were and as fiery as we were about this is not going to work in our backyard, we're still not as powerful as those private pipeline companies who pretty much can put a pipeline in the ground while it's in the courts, while it's being litigated.
Oh, so you don't even have to wait.
Right. So there are some
so it's a bit
major,
too late by then.
Exactly. So there are some major reforms needed in Texas to prevent these private pipeline companies from issuing eminent domain powers when they really don't have a public good to offer. So yes, our voices were big and mighty, but just not mighty enough for the rules and regulations that exist in Texas.
See, that's a really interesting. I mean, public goods are a really interesting concept, which I do distinctly remember studying when I did economics. Because, yeah, it's like who is receiving the public good and who is bearing the cost of that. Right. And you assume for something to be a public good that everyone is receiving equal benefit and bearing equal cost.
Yes.
Whereas clearly this is an instance where that wasn't the case. So I suppose that there's I don't know, was there an offset for a public good for the state or the country as a whole? And someone has to bear that cost. So you said it was taking gas from Mexico.
No, opposite. It was taking it from West Texas to Mexico. Mm-hmm.
To Mexico to then be exported.
Yes.
But that's just because that's where the port was for exporting, I assume.
The demand, yes. And the demand was, I believe, in Asia somewhere. But go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so I'm just thinking this through now. So the people selling the gas in the first place, it is Texan gas. So those are companies operating in Texas, but not necessarily where the pipe is lying, obviously at the source of the pipeline or at the places where the gas is fed in along the way. So is it the issue that there were people who obviously own that land, because I know you have a very high private land ownership in Texas, were having a pipe over their land and not getting anything out of it. And I'm assuming that there was other complications as well with conservation and migration corridors. Was it a buried pipe, or were there ecological concerns as well?
Yes. So I should be clear that people, if the pipeline was crossing private property, there were contracts that were brought to the landowner. But even if the landowner said, I'm not interested in this contract, I don't want to tear up my land, that wasn't an option. They were going to go that route regardless, but the landowner could be compensated if they agreed to these certain terms. Something that we have been monitoring and will continue monitoring is once that pipeline is buried and the ground returns over, and we're trying to make sure that native grasses are planted on the pipeline stretch. That is not always laid out properly. So there's something called surface use agreements that landowners can exercise where they can actually lay out exactly how they want their land to be afterwards. But the thing is, it's not really common knowledge, and to know exactly what to ask for and to demand of the contract, you really have to be educated and very aware of legalese that these pipeline companies use. So it's very tricky. There is compensation. It's not always what is deserved of the land. And if they don't want to take that compensation, most times that pipeline is going to go through anyway, which is just really unsettling.
So it's kind of dumb not to take the compensation, because you're going to end up with the pipeline cutting across your land, whether you
Yeah,
like it or not, by the sounds of it.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
their hands are tied a little bit. And I do think there was some understanding that this pipeline could bring potential jobs to the region.
Yeah.
There was some tax revenue that was going to be given to the local counties where it was passing through. But that is still not really making enough headway to make it, all worth what happened to me.
Yeah. Okay. So that was obviously the catalyst that created this group.
Yes.
So tell me about some of the things that you're involved in now, because you've moved on from there. That is something that is in the past. You can't go and change that now.
Exactly. So in 2018, we started looking at how do we defend these other areas of the region, including water, dark skies, cultural resources, and continuing to bring forward those issues we worked on with land, but not just being about eminent domain and this pipeline issue, because clearly there are these other important things that need to be advocated for and defended in the region. So we have expanded on our mission, expanded on our program areas, and we're strategically thinking through how we can best be conveners for bringing people together and partners together to really make change for the and maintain the beautiful country side that we have in the Big Bend region.
So you're getting to play with water again.
Yes, I know.
As one of the elements of this.
Yes. Yeah, so we have some actual projects that we have going on as well. So we transitioned into this larger scope. We have a whole new website. We've rebranded our logo.
Is this the one that's live now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So just kind of developing the messaging a little better and being more strategic with more program areas is kind of where we are now. Do you want me to touch on some projects?
Yeah. So I've got the website up in front of me because I'm just scanning through this. So I mean that was why I said you're looking at water again, because I can see that there's a water study. So maybe start off with that one.
Sure. So we have been, over the last, I think it's 2 or 3 years, we've been working with an entity called Southwest Research Institute, who is collecting data samples in the Balmorhea Spring System to determine which springs are recharging Balmorhea Springs, which springs are connected. There's like a series of 6 different spring systems that all feed San Solomon Springs, which is what fills Balmorhea Pool. For those that don't know, Balmorhea Pool is actually one of the largest freshwater spring-fed pools that we have in Texas. It's amazing. It's this oasis in the middle of the desert with mountains surrounding it, and it has the clearest water and the coldest spring-fed water you'll ever encounter.
This sounds like a place I need to visit when I go to Texas.
You absolutely should. Yes. So we're funding that research to understand the spring system better, so that we can also know, okay, if something were to start pumping in this area, is this spring system going to be affected? Is it going to affect the larger spring system? So we'll have that final report. I think by January 2021. They're still kind of finalizing things. So that's one thing
so
we've
important
been doing.
Because understanding the feeds for a spring, I mean, you could inadvertently destroy the nature of how that connects and feeds if you don't understand the mechanisms of flow properly.
Yes, exactly. And we also have endangered species in the Balmorhea Pool that are very sensitive to any type of quality change or quantity change, and so it's even more incumbent that we really know what's happening with the spring system. So
cool. Well, I'll look out for that research. Now, dark skies. I have been to a couple of. I happen to live in it's not a dark sky reserve, but in an area. I mean, where my house is, there's like, when I drive into the valley, I think I can see one other house's lights. So it's very dark, and I can watch shooting stars from my area outside my house. But I've been to a couple of actual designated dark sky reserves before, one of which is in New Zealand, and I've been to 1 or 2 in the States. But for people who haven't heard about dark sky reserves and what that is, before you start talking about what you're involved in, like, what is that and why is it important?
Sure. So essentially, a dark sky reserve is a dedicated area that says we're retrofitting lighting properly, we're watching our light pollution. So we want to see the stars. So basically the lighting has to be retrofitted a certain way. There's really not commercial lighting as much in
So
these
like street
areas.
lighting and that kind of thing.
Yes. And if there is street lighting, it's retrofitted so that it's facing downward. So it's not, shooting into the
all the
sky.
spill, yeah.
So basically just designated areas that are remaining dark for a reason and have ordinances around the area that prevent too much light from encroaching on the reserve.
Yeah, because light pollution, it's such a... I'm so used to not seeing light pollution because of where I live. And then when you're in a city, or, I mean, you don't even have to be in a city, but any kind of like semi-urban area, you realize that so many people then never get to really see. I mean, they see some stars, they'll see the bright things, or they'll see some of the planets. Like they'll see Venus, or maybe Mars because it's bright, and the moon. But to really like to see the Milky Way and to see the spectrum of stars that in the sky, unless you leave these areas where there's no light pollution, you just do not see them.
Yes, it's true. And the Big Bend region in Texas is either the first or the second. It's up on the very, very high number of the darkest place in the United States.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yes. And so we have this really great canvas of stars, and we're working with local partners, including the McDonald Observatory and other grassroots entities in the community to just be a partner in this project. But the Big Bend Ranch State Park is working to increase that Big Bend Dark Sky Reserve to cover 17,000 square miles of the Big Bend region. So there's already a lot of open country out there. This would expand it even further, and I think this would be the largest in the nation.
I love that because
acreage.
It's one of the things that really pisses me off, actually. Even in the countryside here, where it is, as I said, it's pretty dark, but it's not a dark sky reserve. And I see like new houses going up, or even if it's not new houses, just people putting like a floodlight on the side of their house, and just being really, well, for a start, sometimes like really inconsiderate the way they set floodlights up, but that's more of a social thing. But also not, like, I'll give one good example is there's a house down the road, and they have all of their, hopefully they don't listen to the podcast. I don't think so. They have all of their trees lit up with lights, like spotlights, sitting in the ground, looking up the lights. And it's like, turn your fucking lights off.
Yeah, that's not okay.
Yeah, I understand that it's kind of pretty. And, maybe turn the lights on, in the first few hours as it's going down, because, that's fine. And this isn't, like, I'm not saying we should all like behave like dictators when it comes to lights, having lights on. But when you are living, particularly it's different in a city. But if you're living in a rural setting, don't go light your house up and all your trees with bloody lights. For a start, what a waste of energy! Something that we're all trying to say.
Yeah.
But secondly, it's ugly. For everybody else, it's ugly. We're here because we want to see what's here naturally, not what's lit up by humans.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
I wish people would more understand that more and just think about it. And I think that for people who have maybe grown up or lived their whole life in these kind of urban settings where there has always been so much light pollution, that really sitting back and realizing what a special thing a dark sky is, maybe that's why they're more inclined to do that. I don't know. I'm only guessing, and they maybe are not thinking of that. Maybe it's an education thing.
It is.
But we need to protect them more.
It is an education piece, and sometimes it's an access piece. So we have local communities who are trying to pass some ordinances to have certain lighting on commercial buildings so that it's already set up to be properly lit in the system, which I think would be great. But the thing is, in the residential spectrum of things, they might see these retrofitting pieces of lighting fixtures in a store and they don't know how to install them, or they think it looks overwhelming. So it's education, access, and then obviously that implementation installation piece, which I think if we could help fund some retrofitting for residential communities, that would be helpful, just to do it for them. And so that you don't even have to worry about it. We're going to help and make sure that your house is lit properly.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important.
It's a challenge.
It is, definitely. But yeah, more dark skies, people. More dark skies. Think about your lights, especially external lights in your house. Yeah. I'm not talking about like going back to World War II when we were worried about German bombers coming over and we all had to black out our lights and put blinkers. Totally different issue. But yeah, we need to think about our skies more.
Yeah, totally.
And you're also involved in like some cultural heritage protection as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah, so we are in the process of actually building kind of a resource page for our website. It's not up yet, so don't look at it. But we are working on having a community resource page for cultural resource spots in our community, leaders in the community, and just trying to help direct people to a place where they can learn more about the holistic history of the region. There is one project in particular that we're working on. There is a cemetery in Presidio, Texas, and it's called Cementerio del Barrio de los Lipanes, which is a Lipan Apache cemetery
I'm
that,
looking at a picture of it now.
yes, so it has historically not really been recognized, and people may have walked by it and not even realized how
It's not in a great
amazing.
state of repair, I have to
Right,
say.
exactly. They don't even understand how it needs to be elevated. And so, what we're trying to do is basically obtain a historical marker to recognize it, to make sure it has proper fencing so that it's a very much a staple of the community and not just this, thing that people don't really understand. So, that's a pretty exciting project we have going on.
So, for something like that, is it more about sourcing funding for something like that? Is that what you're involved in?
I think so. I have not been as much. This is actually Scott, who is one of our
Oh, okay, yeah, I
employees.
spoke to Scott. Yeah.
He has been helping on the local level with Presidio, and so I think obtaining historical marker is something we have to apply for through the state. But in terms of maintenance and upkeep, I do think that we would need to secure some funding to just make sure it stays in that shape. Um, so hopefully
Yeah, no,
we will get that going and maintained for future generations.
yeah, absolutely. Maintaining these, facets of culture that sometimes, I mean, you can see from the picture if people go on the Big Bend Conservation Alliance.org website, you'll be able to have a look at some of the stuff that we've been talking about. And this
Yes.
particular, you can see how if no one cared enough to maintain this and protect it for future generations to learn about this part of cultural heritage, that it would just disappear with the sands of time. I mean, you can see already with the fence falling down and
Mm-hmm.
the sand sort of blowing up over it. It's very easy for these things to disappear, but it's equally so important that we protect these so that people can enjoy them and learn from them. Because as I was discussing with somebody quite recently, without the cultures of this world, it would be a very boring place. Like, without culture, or what are we without the cultures of this world? That's a very
Exactly.
big question. But also protecting the cultures the heritage of the cultures that have established them as they sit today is very important, because I think we can
Yes, and that
learn a lot from them.
preservation. Yes, and you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think the preservation and the elevation of these stories and these staples that were staples in the community long ago that now have been kind of forgotten. I think it's really important to elevate those and to bring them back into light in present day, and really have context behind them as well.
This is it's fascinating work, and I'm so pleased that it's been brought to my attention, and I've had a chance to speak to you. Here's a question for you. How has this year affected the work that you've been doing?
It's been
I've tried to
interesting.
stop asking this question because it's like everybody's affected by this bloody global pandemic in kind of similar ways. It's normally meant that we're at home, we're sitting at our desks, our projects have been postponed, things are not happening, people have lost their jobs. With the
Right.
work that you'd intended to do this year, how's it affected you?
It's interesting because we have been able to do something that I didn't really expect. We conducted a research study where we interviewed 45 people and have put together this awesome research report about priorities for the region. It is on our website. And that was all done during COVID because we can easily call people, we can easily, build these relationships, connect with people. That part hasn't changed. And so I'm really grateful that we've been able to push that forward. We've also had some virtual roundtables. So part of the report, kind of an action step after the report was published, was to bring together community leaders, opinion leaders, and have these virtual roundtables to talk through issues like groundwater, issues like eminent domain, all the things that we've been talking about pretty much. And so we've been having virtual roundtables, and everyone is probably ready to be done with Zoom forever. But it has helped us engage on a larger spectrum. And also, people aren't having to travel to come to a meeting for 1 hour. So it's almost been beneficial in a way for that.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm done with Zoom. only in that it seems. I think there's a careful balance to tread with there, because I think
Yes.
sometimes, fortunately, I don't have a 9 to 5 job. I work for myself. I do loads of different things, so I'm only getting on meetings that I actually want to be on. But I know from speaking to other people whose normal 9 to 5 jobs have transitioned to them working from their kitchen table, is that they spend their entire day on Zoom in meetings because people feel like they need to have meetings, and then they got to actually go and do their day job once all these meetings are over, which is just insane to me. So I think there's an ease of doing it that means maybe people do it too often. However, on the flip side of that, exactly what you said, for me, it's been amazing to see this realization that we don't need to get on I don't need to, for example, I sit on a committee for it's like a science communication committee for a conservation organization here. And I've only just started sitting on the committee, so I never went to any of the meetings prior to COVID-19. But prior to that, they would meet twice a year, and everyone would meet in London. And it just seems like such an incredible waste of time and resources. And I think now, I mean, maybe the people who live down there will maybe go meet in a room, but I think the plan is now that before, if you couldn't make it, you just weren't at the meeting.
Right.
Whereas now they will set up a Zoom link. So like for me, that's way better, because I travel a lot. Well, I used to travel when such things were possible with work, or I'm like, I can't really take in 2 days out, which is what it would take for me to get to London and back, basically. Take 2 days out of my week to go to that meeting, even though I really want to contribute and play my part.
Right.
It'd be so much better just I stop what I'm doing and sit on the Zoom call for 3 hours. That's just so much better. And just think of all the time that we've won back by using it in a smart way. So yeah, I think if there is a positive to come from this, more embracing the technology to be smart about our use of time, because I think actually, especially in the terms in the world of environmental protection and conservation, money is a very precious resource, but so is time. Time, in fact, I would argue, because of the small number, relatively speaking, of people involved in it, time is one of our most precious resources.
Yes, agreed. So much. Yes. Snaps for you. I definitely agree. I was going to say too, in West Texas at least, so everything is pretty far apart, right? There's
Of
like
course,
even the closest, I don't know if you know what Walmart is, but
I do know Walmart, yeah. I've been into Walmart, yeah.
So,
I know Walmart, you can buy chickens at one counter and an AR at the other, or you used to be able to.
Welcome to America. Yeah, the United States. But yeah, so I mean, living close to a mall, some of the things that people rely on in urban centers just doesn't exist in West Texas, or it's 2.5 hours to get there. And so I think cutting down on travel for people who are already really spaced out has been nice too.
Look, thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful that you've brought this to our attention, and I realize that for the for some people listening, I'd say probably about half our listeners are in America, and the other half are dotted around the world, with a concentration in the UK, where I live and podcast from mostly, and then Australia and New Zealand. And this is a very a local consideration. This is not only in the States, but it's in Texas. It does happen to be a very big state, but in one state in the US. However, the conversations that we've had and the topics that we've covered are applicable all over the world. So yeah, it's so important to have these, and so important, I've brought this up many times before, to learn from the work and the failures and successes of organizations around the world who are doing very similar things. There will be people in organizations in other states and in other countries around the world who are paralleling a lot of the work that you're doing. And I think more synergy there, going back to this good use of resources, is going to help everybody going forward.
Absolutely. 100%.
In fact, do you have any partnerships within other organizations?
Yeah. We do. Yes. So we have worked closely with Patagonia. We're in partnership with Yeti. We have several funders who are all over the United States, and a lot of local partners that, we wouldn't be able to even initiate any of these projects without our local partners. Shield Heirs Ranch Foundation. They're a great funder and supporter of ours. So it's a partnership is going to get this change happening, right? All these
Yeah.
partnerships that we have, that's how real change is actually going to happen. And so I will actually not list all the partners because I will forget one, but those
That's
are
okay.
a
People can
few.
go on the website. Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely check that out. We appreciate them so much and hoping to expand that partner list so we can be even bigger and even more powerful for the region.
I think that just before we close off, just because you brought it up now, it's something that I've been quite critical of, especially in the kind of the hunting fishing space,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more the hunting space than the fishing space, which is a world that I also move in. Is that I don't think, with few exceptions, I mean, Sitka has been quite a good one, especially recently as being one of the exceptions with their conservation grants. But there is not many companies who are truly putting actual money, like dollars and pounds, into on the ground conservation initiatives that are making a difference. And I've sat at meetings and had conversations at big conventions, whether it be like SHOT Show or the equivalent ones in the over in Europe, and said, you realize that if you are not involved in this, if you don't have a seat at the table and you're not having conversations about how we integrate sustainable use through hunting or fishing in the conservation and the bigger management and environmental movement going forward, you won't have a business going forward. And so many of them do not get it. They don't understand. Their time horizon is just too short. And I know that, I mean, you mentioned Yeti and Patagonia. I mean, those are two big names that everybody listening to this podcast will know. Those are two companies that have been particularly good at embracing and acknowledging the fact that they need to be engaged. They need to be engaged because I guess they probably feel like they have a moral obligation. But I think that, and I don't know I don't think I know anybody yet anymore. And I don't know really anybody that well at Patagonia. But I think beyond a moral obligation, they also realize that it's not just. It is equally about protecting the environment and conservation for the future, for the continuation of their companies, as it is for making a better planet for everybody.
Yes.
So
Yes, and it's going to take all of us. I mean, I am convinced that everyone from every industry needs to be at this table, speaking about conservation and real strategic solutions that are going to make sense, that are not, going to be economically dire to the region that already depends on just a few sectors, for jobs, which is agriculture, oil and gas, and some others. But I think it's going to require partnerships on a larger scale with a more diverse group of people to really get things moving in the way that they need to.
okay, so there was actually one other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and this nearly slipped my mind, but I'm just checking my notes here, and that is the work that's being done by Texas Parks and Wildlife and the Borderlands Research. What is that?
Yeah, so Texas Parks and Wildlife and Borderlands Research Institute have actually both been great partners of ours. Obviously, we don't work as much in wildlife, but they're very much a part of our conversations when it comes to groundwater issues and land issues because obviously those impact wildlife.
Yeah.
So Texas Parks and Wildlife, we've worked with them more when it comes to Balmorhea Springs, and they do have a state park there that they manage. That Balmorhea Pool is managed by Texas Parks and Wildlife. So we work in parallel with them a lot and just keep each other informed to the people who are working locally. And then Borderlands Research Institute, we work with Dr. Harvison at Sol Ross and Billy Tarrant to make sure that we're focusing our programming and kind of working in parallel with them as well. And there is another organization out there who we work close with that affiliates these other two organizations as well. So kind of a roundabout answer, but basically we're always in touch with them and we have had them involved in our stakeholder conversations because we understand that they're very much a part of the region and its success.
Okay, so this is bringing in this is how you're tying the wildlife component to the more environmental issues that you're dealing with.
Right. Yeah, we bring in those partners who are more geared towards wildlife conservation into the conversation that we're having about land, dark skies, and water.
Yeah, I can see that. In fact, Texas Parks and Wildlife were actually a supporter of one of the issues of Modern Huntsman. I can't remember which volume it was, but they were definitely involved in one of the volumes. So it's good to see them mentioned again.
They have a
And
large network that's very knowledgeable and has a lot of great expertise. And they have a lot of local people working out in West Texas. So even though they're based in Austin, there's still a lot of people who understand the issues locally, which is very important.
So are you able to pool and share resources between these other organizations and the university?
I think that we're getting to the point where we're being more strategic with that. In other instances, we've had local water symposiums, for instance, where we brought in partners like Texas Parks and Wildlife has spoken at that event talking about the spring systems. I think we have not fully leveraged those relationships or really strategically thought through, okay, so how can we build some programming and work on even bigger projects? We've done some small scale stuff, which has been very successful.
Adeline, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Fascinating conversation. Glad that we managed to raise it to the awareness of our podcast listeners. And I will direct people over to the website, I guess, if they have any questions, or can people get involved? How can people get involved with you guys?
Well, funny you should ask. So we are actually on the verge of launching a friends group, which
cool.
would be a way to connect with us and also have some really cool merchandise. So I mentioned the partnership with Yeti. They've actually supplied us with merch that has our new brand on it, and we're launching this sometime in November. I think we're working on that. But anyway, we're going to have a friends group where people can still be involved, and then obviously we have a newsletter. Please follow all of our social media platforms. That's where a lot of great content originates. So a lot of ways to get involved, and then maybe one day we'll also have a volunteer network for some of our programming.
That's very cool. Well, what I'm going to do is the next time I'm out in Texas, which hopefully is going to be pretty soon, I'd love to come out and see some of the stuff if we're allowed. I don't know what the lockdown procedures are in Texas right now, but it'd be really cool to come out and see and photograph and maybe write up some of the initiatives that you guys are involved in.
We'd love to have you. Yeah, we'd love to host you, and we can definitely enjoy that dark sky that we were talking about.
And I can bring my cowboy boots.
You have to, and maybe you'll have a hat by then too. I don't know.
Yeah, I will. Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you, Byron.